This new official acts immunity now lies about like a loaded weapon for any president that wishes to place his own interests, his own political survival, or his own financial gain above the interests of the nation. The president of the United States is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way, under the majority's reasoning, he now will be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy's SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power, immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, immune, 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 immune. Let the president violate the law. Let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain. Let him use his official power for evil ends. Even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, the damage has been done. The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law.
Hello and welcome to Next 2.0 on WQLN PBS NPR. Next is produced by the Public Voice Media. I am your host, Marcus Atkinson, coming to you from the Public Voice Studios on Parade Street in Erie, Pennsylvania. If you want to know more about Next 2.0, you can go to Facebook and like the page. You can follow us on Instagram at Next 2.0 Erie. There you can keep up with upcoming show promos, events, and clips about what's next for our communities and our democracy. Thank you so much for tuning in. What you just heard was a snippet from Justice Sonia Sotomayor's scathing dissent of the Supreme Court ruling as it pertains to the powers of the President of the United States. This has been an on-running theme of this show about the fall of America. And I know it sounded like hyperbole. It sounded like it was hype. There was a reason why we had the emergency sound in the backdrop of her reading that dissent, because I am one person who believes that the scenarios that she painted in that dissent are scenarios that should concern every single American. If he orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, or if he organizes a coup to hold on to political power, if he takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, immune, 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 the dissent reads. Are you concerned? Are you worried? We do this on the heels of another 4th of July celebration, and it trips me out how you see, and listen, I understand that it is a huge holiday for this country. The Democratic Republic that has been established right here in the United States is 200 plus years old, is one of the greatest experiments in government known to man. All day long, I will acknowledge that. At the same time, not just on this show, but multiple others have said, are we concerned about what direction we see some of these things going in? And the past president, 45, has unleashed some things that all of us should be concerned about. When he even went to the Supreme Court and said, hey, shouldn't I be immune to some of this BS? It was laughable to the average American. And I snickered at the audacity, the brazenness of him even putting that before the court. But what concerned me, and I've stated it on the show, was just how compromised the Supreme Court has proven themselves to be, how hyper-partisan the Supreme Court has shown themselves to be in recent years. And I said, I'm curious. I'm morbidly curious to see just what they come back with. And man, oh man, I think a Pandora's box has been opened that will forever change the landscape of this country. I've often said that when people are in history, when they are living history, my guess is you can almost guarantee that they never know to what extent history is being made right before their eyes. I mean, I think when they're in it, they see, ooh, this is a different tone. This is a different thing. And I won't name historical events because I don't want anybody to feel like I'm comparing per se. But you can go back through history from the Bible to the countries and everything else. There are things that we look at historically and we say, wow, how did that happen? Did the people who were living through those moments understand that this would be life and world altering? My guess would be no. But we have the benefit of hindsight, 2020 hindsight, better than any generation known to man, because we have access to information at a much, much deeper and profound level than any generation that came before us. And so I would think that we would be able to discern that there is a historic and a existential shift going on here that may just see our way of life forever changed. And if our way of life is forever changed, what does that look like for the rest of the world? Because again, if you're president of the United States, you are often referred to as the leader of the free world. But now let's get into what other people are saying about this decision. Obviously, 45 challenged it. What is 46 saying? What was his reaction when he heard about this Supreme Court ruling? Let me give you that right now.
Today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. This is a fundamentally new principle, and it's a dangerous precedent, because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law, even including the Supreme Court of the United States. The only limits will be self-imposed by the president alone.
So there you have it. President Biden seems to be just as concerned as the host and countless others about what I view as a galactically irresponsible, if not hyper-partisan ruling. If you think about it, they are abandoning the individual accountability model. And what they're trying to introduce is a new presidential accountability model that authorizes the judicial branch to exempt the president from punishment under law. If you look at the history of our country, how this country was birthed, for that matter, with the King of England and the Boston Tea Party and all of these things. I mean, when they knew what it felt like to have a king with absolute power, and you hear all the glorified stories about how the United States was started because they wanted to recognize something different. They wanted to build something different. Then when you look at how the actual execution of that new vision played out, being an African American, that power of even the president with Congress and all of these other checks and balances systems still gave way to harsh treatment, inhumane treatment for millions of people, even under the current model. I shudder to think if you gave somebody the ability to just do whatever they feel like they quote unquote need to do for the betterment of the country. And I want you to understand this. When Trump campaigned for more votes, when Trump campaigned to reverse a legal election, when Trump ginned up this crowd on January 6, 2020, in his mind, his justification is, I am doing this to save the nation. I am doing this in the name of democracy. That's where his mind was. That's where his mind is. And even when you talk to people that follow him blindly, may I add, most, that's their logic behind this as well. But there's an interesting clip with Justice Amy Coney Barrett, and she is cracking the door open in terms of how do we differentiate between official acts and unofficial acts. And she may have knowingly, what we'll say unknowingly or knowingly, helped out the prosecution as she starts down this line of thought in terms of what it looks like to prosecute a president under such circumstances. Let you listen to her comments.
Can I ask you, go ahead. Go ahead. So you concede that private acts don't get immunity?
We do.
Okay. So in the special counsel's brief on pages 46 and 47, he urges us, even if we were to decide or assume that there was some sort of immunity for official acts, that there were sufficient private acts in the indictment for the trial to go for the case to go back and the trial to begin immediately. And I want to know if you agree or disagree about the characterization of these acts as private. Petitioner turned to a private attorney, was willing to spread knowingly false claims of election fraud to spearhead his challenges to the election results. Private?
As alleged. I mean, we dispute the allegation, but
Of
that
course.
sounds private to me.
Sounds private. Petitioner conspired with another private attorney who caused the filing in court of a verification signed by petitioner that contained false allegations to support a challenge.
That
Private.
also sounds private.
3 private actors, 2 attorneys, including those mentioned above, and a political consultant helped implement a plan to submit fraudulent slates of presidential electors to obstruct the certification proceeding, and petitioner and a co-conspirator attorney directed that effort.
You read it quickly. I believe that's
Yeah.
private. I don't want to,
So those acts you would not dispute. Those were private, and you wouldn't raise a claim that they were official.
as characterized. What we would say, Your Honor, if I may, what we would say is official is things like meeting with the Department of Justice to deliberate about who's going to be the acting Attorney General of the United States.
Sure.
Communicating with the American public, communicating with Congress about matters of enormous federal
Thank you.
concern.
Thank you.
All right, and so that's Justice Coney Barrett laying bare the fact that this may not be the slam dunk that Trump and his legal team think that it is. Although, in my opinion, this is still extremely problematic, this ruling. But I want to read you a statement from Randall Eliason, a law professor at George Washington University. He states that Barrett had helped confirm which acts by Trump in his election fraud indictment could be considered private. He also said distinguishing the former president's official acts from his personal ones shouldn't be a difficult task for Judge Tanya Chutkan, who is overseeing Trump's election fraud case in Washington, D.C. Eliason also goes on to write on X, which is formerly known as Twitter, that Trump's attorney at oral argument conceded that a number of these acts were private. Justice Barrett noted the same thing in her concurrence. I just don't see this as this hugely difficult problem for Chutkan, end quote. Again, risk of being redundant, ruling is problematic overall. But that's another thing to consider in this argument. Listen, this thing is going to get messy, very, very, very messy. And when it's all said and done, I think they'll look back and say, you know, we created a mess and a monster. Now, there's a lady by the name of Lisa Graves, and I want to play you a clip from her on Democracy Now! I would paraphrase everything she breaks down in this very long clip, but she, I believe, so wonderfully articulates why this should be a concern for every U.S. citizen and for every citizen of other countries, for that matter, given the role the United States plays on the global landscape. And she does such a wonderful job that I just want to play you her clip in a minute or two. I also thought about something. I know before I expressed concern about President Biden's debate performance, or lack thereof, you can say. And there are a whole host of people saying the same thing. Should he step down? Does he have the capacity to do what needs to be done? Interestingly enough, I'm thinking about this to myself, and I said, you know, and not that Biden's camp is listening to this small host or to this show, but in my mind, is this an opportunity for Biden to hijack the America First mantra? Is this an opportunity for him to show leadership in the most profound of ways by stepping aside, all in the name of putting America first, all in the name of putting democracy first? I don't think anybody would blame him given everything that's going on in his life right now. There is the issue of age and all of the natural progressiveness, the natural progressive nature of the aging process. Although it hits different on different folks, you can see the process taking its toll to whatever extent on President Biden. That's not a knock. It's a pathway we all have to go down at some point. I don't think people would blame him based on that. I don't think people would blame him based upon everything that's going on with his son. Certainly that can't be good for his health as he watches all of that get laid bare. Even when you listen to the dirty laundry of the Biden family being laid bare in that trial from a health standpoint, what kind of toll does that take on a man of his age? Already carrying the burden of a lost wife to tragedy, a lost son to tragedy. This is all a bit much for President Biden to carry. If his speechwriters penned the right speech with the right tone and wrapped the right reasoning around it, there might be an opportunity to completely take the wind out of the sails of former President Trump and his "Let's Make America First" dogma. This, in my opinion, may just actualize those words and allow people to get on board and say, you know what, this is what it looks like. They'll be able to juxtapose that to the self-serving nature of Donald Trump that has also been, not that it took this to expose it, but has been exposed at a much deeper level through these trials, has been exposed to a much more profound level through these convictions. And let me add this. The idea of jumping over Kamala Harris is not going to bode well if they go that route. And we know that President Biden is resisting the idea of stepping down. We know he's calling for people to just be loyal and hang in there with me. We can do this. But we also know that this crescendo is growing, that this chorus amongst Democrats and Democratic voters is growing. And we also know that we can't unsee what we saw in that debate. But if they plan on making a move that direction and they want to try to work around or over Kamala Harris, it'll be a mistake. This thing is already messy, and that's a huge understatement. But you're talking about potentially the first female and the first African-American female to be put into the office. And even as they run the numbers, it can't get any worse than what it is. I think that she's polling slightly higher. Whatever the situation is, I think that he could set her up or set the party up to turn the tide if he did it and he did it the right way with the right phrasing. But I digress. Let me go back to Lisa Graves. I'm going to tell you who this lady is before I play her clip, because she's a credible voice. And she doesn't just have a good take and a good opinion. I think it's actually rooted in something. This lady is the founder and executive director of what they call True North Research, a national investigative watchdog group that works with journalists and other researchers to shine a bright light on the dark money fueling regressive agendas targeting vital institutions in our republic, such as courts and public schools. But now let me read you some of the things that she's done in the past. She served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Policy Development / Legal Policy at the U.S. Department of Justice under Attorneys General Janet Reno and John Ashcroft, Chief Counsel for Nominations for Senator Patrick Leahy on the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, Deputy Chief of the Article 3 Judges Division of the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts, with oversight of the Financial Disclosure Office and more, and as an adjunct law professor at George Washington University Law School. She also worked as senior legislative strategist for the ACLU on national security and civil liberties and held other posts. She's been counted on for her opinion in multiple sections of government and multiple hearings, and I just think this lady is credible. I want to play her take, and I want you to pay special attention to the notion of Judges Alito and Thomas recusing themselves. Jenny Thomas's communication with the White House is a matter of record, back and forth during the January 6 riots. We've already made reference on this show about Justice Alito and the flags flying from his private property that show him to, at the very least, be a MAGA sympathizer. Should they even have been present to make decisions on this case? She talks about that as well. And so listen to the take here on Democracy Now! From Lisa Graves.
This decision is the most reckless and dangerous decision ever issued by the U.S. Supreme Court, because it utterly transforms our country and the rule of law into one that's optional for whoever is the president of the United States. This decision is not a legitimate decision, in my view. It's a decision by a faction that dominates this Supreme Court, in part due to appointments by Donald Trump that were improvident, and of people who certainly should have recused themselves from this case namely Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. That indictment that was issued by a grand jury of Americans looking at the law, the criminal law of the United States, was well pleaded with tremendous and significant evidence of criminality by Donald Trump. And then you had this Supreme Court intervene and slow walk its resolution, only to introduce a dramatic departure from our very system of checks and balances to cloak the president in immunity that does not exist in the Constitution, never mentioned in the Constitution, and that defies the actual language of the Constitution that requires the president to be the person who takes an oath to uphold this Constitution and ensure that our laws are faithfully executed. If a president can claim that any legal act that he's doing is somehow part of an official act, not only has this court sought to immunize it, this court meaning this faction of the court, but also this faction has asserted that the act itself can't even be part of an indictment or evidence, which ignores the law of evidence that basically any evidence of a crime can be admitted to show your criminality. This does not occur in a vacuum. This occurs in a very real situation where you can see how this court, the Roberts Court, has put its thumb on the scale of justice to favor Donald Trump despite the way that he behaved on January 6th and his efforts to overturn the presidential election in our democracy. You can see that because in the Colorado case, where a trial court judge in the Supreme Court of Colorado found, based on evidence that they reviewed, that clearly Donald Trump incited that insurrection and sought to overturn the election, that he was barred from being on the ballot in Colorado. The Supreme Court acted quickly to take that case, heard argument quickly, and resolved it quickly because they wanted to ensure that Donald Trump was on the ballot. But when this outlier immunity claim, argued by one of these abortion extremists who works for Trump, claiming, even in response to arguments that perhaps perhaps a president could get away with assassinating a political rival by calling it an official act, this court sprung into action in the spring to stop that criminal case from going forward and to entertain these egregious and outrageous arguments. And now with John Roberts, with Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, Brett Kavanaugh, and Neil Gorsuch, giving this outrageous notion the blessing of this faction, we stand unmoored from the rule of law in America. And this court must be held accountable. I certainly support every effort to hold it accountable. These justices, each of them, John Roberts and the others, told Congress, told the American people when they were facing their confirmation hearings that no one was above the law. And yet today, or actually yesterday for Donald Trump, they were willing to set aside that fundamental principle in American law, in our Constitution, that no president is king, and basically give President Trump retrospectively king-like powers and perhaps prospectively. And this comes as Donald Trump has been calling for military prosecution of Liz Cheney, for the political prosecution of his political enemies, and for being, in essence, a dictator on day one and perhaps many other days, should he be elected president. This could not be a more dangerous and reckless decision by this faction of the U.S. Supreme Court that truly is out of control.
I could spend the next 3 hours on this microphone trying to express just how dangerous this decision is. And in that 2-3 minute clip, she said it better than I ever could. She said it both better than most ever could. This is a problem. Now, in the event that you need to be reminded, let me play you a clip of when former President Trump was interviewed about the prospect of him going to jail.
Is it something that concerns you of the people making sure that they don't go out of their right mind if something like that happens? Because I know what I'm thinking of could happen if that, for example, they do say Jack Smith says, okay, I'm going to put Donald Trump in jail.
I think it's a very dangerous thing to even talk about, because we do have a tremendously passionate group of voters. And I mean, maybe, maybe 100, 150. I've never seen anything like it. Much more passion than they had in 2020 and much more passion than they had in 2016. I think it would be very dangerous.
So in other words, you ain't seen nothing yet. If you think the MAGA movement was off the chain during the Stop the Steal movement, if you think they were off the chain during the January 6th riots, you ain't seen nothing yet. Mess around and put me in jail. As they say in the hood, mess around and find out, but they don't say mess around. You know what they say. Put me in jail and see what happens. Am I the only one who views that as a veiled threat? It'd be a very dangerous proposition. It'd be a very dangerous thing to put me in jail. And this is the same former president who almost immediately after this ruling, and it was made reference to in that Lisa Graves clip, almost immediately reposted on Truth Social, his little social media network, about a military tribunal against Liz Cheney. This is the same person who has told his followers, I will be your retribution, who has repeatedly referred to January 6th jailed criminals and insurrectionists as political hostages, who said he would be a dictator on day one, who said that if reelected, that the election process after that next term would go much smoother, would be much different. Well, technically, if you do get back in, that's it for you. That's a second term. But he has said in speeches, it'll go much smoother if I get back in the next time we have an election. I mean, come on. And so what Lisa Graves outlines, what Justice Sotomayor put in her dissent, is not hyperbole. It's not hype. Joy Reid from MSNBC had one of the best outros on this topic of anybody I've seen on television or on YouTube. It's an outro that I think is appropriate to end this show with. Albeit very short, it gets straight to the point.
In other words, to put it in Game of Thrones terms, America now has a king and 6 hands of the king. Happy effing Independence Day.
She said what she said. That's it for our show today. Tune in next time for more discussion and analysis with local and national guests. Remember the next 2.0 streams on Fridays on all major podcast platforms and on the 4th Sunday of the month at 4 p.m. on WQLN PBS NPR, which is 91.3 FM. A new feature also, if you want to leave a message, comment, or suggestion for the show, you can call the next hotline at 814-240-8816. We look forward to hearing from you. I'm Marcus Atkinson. Come and join us again so that you can hear about what's next for our communities and our democracy. Peace.